Decide to set goals. Now, some of you in the room right now, you're thinking, yes, we're going to talk about goal setting because you love it. Others of you in the room are thinking, oh, I'm not very good at that. Do we have to talk about that? And I just want to encourage all of us. Goal setting is a good thing. That when you learn how to set goals, you're more productive in your life without wearing yourself out. And it helps you to make better decisions in every other area of your life. And so learning how to set goals, it's a good thing, and it's simply a skill that you pick up along the way. Nobody was born a good goal setter. You just learn the skill as you go. And the place where goal setting starts is by you identifying priorities. Because if you don't know what your priorities are, you can't really set goals because things get too confused. And setting priorities, it's really simple. It simply is based on the word prior, and it just means identifying what comes before. So if you have a list of things to do, prioritizing means I'm going to put the things that come before first. And you can do it in the big way. Like most of us have done the big list. The most important thing in my life is God. The second most important thing in my life is my family. Third most important thing in my life is, and many of you have made that big list. And that's a good thing. But priorities are also very active in our life. That one of the questions we all should be asking on a regular basis is, in this situation, who are the most important people? Because you always want to do what is best for the most important people in any situation. Now, when I was raising kids, I was faced with the question, how do I balance my commitment to my kids and my commitment to my parents? Because I wanted to honor my parents, but I had a big responsibility to raise my children. And so I started asking the question, in this situation, who's most important? And I realized my kids were. So I started saying, in this season of life, I'm going to do the things that are best for my kids. Well, my kids have grown up, my parents have gotten older, and it's the same question, but the answer is different because now my parents are actually more important. But they have more needs now, they need more focus and attention, and my kids are pretty self-sufficient. And so by asking the question, who's the most important people in this situation, it brings a lot of clarity to where I need to put my time and energy. And so as you think about moving ahead in setting goals, it really starts with you identifying your priorities. So take a few moments right now and work through the worksheet in your booklet on identifying what's important to you. And once you know what's important to you, you can then set goals to get the most important things done. So man, again, goal setting, it's just a skill. Any of you can do it. And for some reason, goal setting seems to be an intimidating thing to a lot of men. Like I hear a lot of excuses of why men don't set goals. Like some men have said to me, it's not possible to see the future, so I'm just going to take what today gives me. Other men have said, well, I don't think we should try to plan out our whole lives. That's God's job. Sometimes I hear, I think it's presumptuous to set goals. It feels like I'm telling God what to do. Some guys just say, it gives me a headache. Some guys say, I don't need to set goals. My wife will tell me what to do. Some guys say, well, I'm just not a leader. I'm not a leader at work. I'm not really a leader at home. My boss sets the goals we all pursue. And so as we get started with goal setting, just turn to the guy sitting next to you and just say to him, man, you can do this. No excuses. So man, I just want to encourage you, goal setting it's a normal activity for us. God actually built it into the DNA of human beings to set goals. And I know that's true because of Proverbs 16 and verse 9, which says, in his heart, a man plans his course. See, he built it into you. It's your job to make plans. And there is this human and divine interaction that's supposed to be going on in our lives, that we set goals. We actually say, okay, God, I'm going to head this direction. And just like priorities is figuring out what comes before, all goals is figuring out what comes next. And so your job in life is to set goals to keep you in motion. It's actually God's job to make sure you arrive where you're supposed to go, but it's your job to make plans. It's your job to stay in motion. It's your job to say, I believe this is the direction God wants me to go, and to get moving. I'm sure you've heard the adage, you cannot steer a parked car. So the purpose of goals is to keep you moving so that God can steer you where he wants you to go. And Proverbs 16:9 also tells us that it's God's job to steer us. Because the second half of the verse says, but the Lord determines his steps. So there's this remarkable partnership between us and God that when we make plans and we set goals, it gets us moving, and then God will direct our steps and get us to where we need to go. So you don't have to know the future to set goals. You don't have to have the whole plan of your life figured out to set goals. You don't even have to know really where you're going to be 5 or 10 years from now, although if you have some sense, that's a good thing. All you have to do is to stay in motion. To make plans that you know are good, make plans that you want to do, make plans that you know are consistent with God's word, and then just get moving. And I can guarantee you God's big enough to get you where he wants you to go. Take Jonah, for example. Jonah set goals. I mean, he was heading the wrong direction, but he was heading. And God was plenty powerful enough to pick him up and drop him off special delivery exactly where he wanted him to be. So our job, again, it's not to figure out everything in the future. It's not even for us to figure out everything that's going on. It's simply to keep our lives in motion. And because of that, because we're limited and we're human and we're dealing with a God that knows everything, setting goals really takes us on a switchback journey in life. That the way life works is if you're here today, when you set goals, it's going to move you in a direction. Now, when you get close to that direction, God's going to say, okay, it's time to steer, and he'll turn you, and it'll move off to another direction. And when you get close to the next goal that you have set, God will turn you again, and so he's moving you forward. But he doesn't move you in a straight line from where you are to where he's going to take you. He takes you on this switchback journey back and forth. So you'll get a little bit of the picture as you go, and it'll keep you moving. And let me illustrate this from my life. Because if you had told me in my 20s that I was going to be an author, I honestly would have laughed you out of the building. Like, I didn't read books recreationally. I loved research books, but books in general I didn't really love. And so if you had told me, hey, God's plan for you is to be an author, I would have been, I think you got the wrong guy. But what I did know is I loved ministry. That was the thing that God had put in my heart. And I've seen the same thing in other guys' lives. Like, some guys love business. Some guys love music. Some guys love coaching. Like, I believe that God puts that desire in our heart for what he wants us to do. And I knew I loved ministry. So I set in my heart to be a youth pastor because I loved working with teenagers. And while I was working as a youth pastor, God had me change directions. And I was praying one day, and I was praying about the church that I was working at, which was a good church. But I was praying about all the things that I thought could be improved at this church. And while I was praying, this thought crossed my mind. And the thought sounded like, hey, Bill, if you think you can run a church, go do it. I want you to put up or shut up. And so I went, whoa, well, that was pretty direct. So I changed course, and I started looking for a church to pastor. And through a series of events, I ended up at a church in San Diego County, where I spent 15 years as a senior pastor. And I was convinced that I was going to probably be at that church most of my life, and I would be a preaching pastor from that point on most of my life. So I just committed myself to it. And as I was starting to pastor this church, I started to realize, you know what, I don't exactly know what I'm doing here. And if I don't get a mentor, I'm going to make a big mistake. I'm either going to forget to do something that's really important, or I'm going to do something I shouldn't do. So I made a list of men that I respected, and I was going to go down the list. There were 8 men on the list. I was going to go down the list one at a time and ask if they would take time to mentor me so that I could avoid making that big mistake. Well, I called a man named Jim Conway, and I said, Jim, I love taking classes from you in seminary. I really respected the way your ministry has gone. Would you mentor me and figure out how to be a pastor and how to raise a family in the midst of ministry? He said yes, and I started meeting with him once a week. And about 18 months into that process, he looked at me one day and he said, hey, Bill, me and my wife would like to co-author a book with you and your wife. Would you be willing to do that? And you know those moments in your life, guys, where you realize you just got called out? That was one of those for me. He and his wife, this was their 13th book. It was Pam's and my first book. And I just knew the moment he said this, I'm supposed to do that. So I committed myself to the next path on the journey of my life, which was to develop a writing ministry and to start doing conference work. And the conference thing was pretty funny too. We wrote this first book called Pure Pleasure, Making Your Marriage a Great Affair. I got a phone call in our office one day and said, is this Bill and Pam? And we said, well, yeah. And they said, do you do marriage conferences? And we looked at each other and said, yeah, we do those. And we committed to do our first marriage conference, and we found out that as we spoke together on stage, it worked. And so we started pastoring this church in San Diego and speaking part-time. And even at that point, I would have never dreamed that it would have been a full-time pursuit, not being in the local church, but being out doing conference work. But at the right time, in the right set of circumstances, God made it obvious that that was the next step in the path of my life. And I share all that with you just to let you know you don't have to figure it out ahead of time. You just need to set goals that keep you in motion so that God can steer you where He wants you to go. So before we talk about how to actually set goals, take a moment right now and just discuss among yourselves. Share with one another. So what is the clearest goal you have in your life right now that's keeping you in motion?